Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Monday, December 16th, 2024. I am John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. I want to thank everybody who sent us in so many wonderful questions for us to answer on holiday podcasts as requested on Friday. If you want to continue, just send us your queries to podcast@commentary.org, and we'll see whether or not we can get them in. Also, a little moment yet again to thank everyone who has been donating so generously to our end-of-year fundraising drive here at our 501c3 nonprofit. If you have not done so yet, please consider putting Commentary on your nice list, and you can do that by going to donate at commentary.org. commentary.org/donate, which is on our website. You could email us at donate@commentary.org, but that would be silly because you can just go to the website and do it on your own. And we would all be grateful. We being executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Media commentary columnist Christine Rosen. Hi, Christine.
Hi, John.
Washington commentary columnist Matthew Continetti. Hi, Matt.
Hi, John.
And senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
Well, I
just want to start by thanking all the people who sent in their concerns about Brazil nuts. We've got a lot of feedback about Brazil nuts, and I especially appreciate those who sent me the doctor's recommendations for the daily limit of Brazil nuts so that I don't get selenium poison. So thank you all for the Brazil nuts. The consensus was that they are delicious, in moderation because of the selenium. So
I'm very concerned about your selenium level. I'm also worried about your taste buds because they seem to enjoy Brazil nuts, and I don't.
Our readers agreed. Our listeners agreed.
Our listeners are very manifold. They cover the waterfront. They have many opinions. Most of them are good. Some of them are bad. This is one of the bad ones, clearly. And that's just the way it is. But we don't need to have a controversy over our nut intake because, frankly, I did not have ABC News giving $15 million to the Trump presidential library on my bingo card for 2024, although it does seem to be almost like the perfect surreal capper to the year in which somebody survives 91 indictments, 7 different court trials, 2 assassinations, a switcheroo in the rivalry of candidacies, and ends up in the middle of December with one of the leading news organizations in the world effectively acknowledging that it had defamed him and was willing to pay an extraordinarily large settlement. And let's be clear that $15 million is an extraordinarily large settlement to make in a case in which George Stephanopoulos said on either this week, it was on this week to Nancy Mace, that Donald Trump had raped E. Jean Carroll, the New York City journalist, when in fact he had been found liable for some form of sexual abuse by a New York City civil jury in a matter extending back to the mid-1990s, so peculiarly back into the mid-1990s that nobody could date the event. So,
one additional fact: the jury was asked on its jury questionnaire if they had thought he was guilty of rape. That was, and they said no. So it was actually the judge, after the verdict came in, using the word rape, which the jury itself had declined to use given the evidence at the civil trial, which is, again, a bar far lower than evidence at criminal trial. Sexual assault, sexual abuse, still very bad. That's obvious.
It is very bad, but it is not a criminal.
The jury did not find him
nor
liable for
rape. Rape is a felony crime. This was a civil proceeding about whether or not to hold somebody financially accountable for an action. The evidentiary rules governing how you define things in civil trials are vastly different from how we define them in criminal trials. And I'm going to say flat out, I don't believe E. Jean Carroll. I think this story is a lie. I think she told it in the course of a memoir where she buried it in the middle of page 122. And some resourceful person said to her, you could really end Donald Trump's career if we can use this as the basis for a civil action. She dug up a couple of friends who said contemporaneously that she had told them that she had had this encounter with Donald Trump in Bergdorf Goodman's sometime in the mid 1990s, and that was evidently enough for the jury to find. We are not obliged in a civil proceeding to say that because the jury sat and listened to all the evidence, that we are in no position to judge. We are in a position to judge. We can read exactly what she wrote. It was the cover story in New York Magazine as part of the excerpt of her book. And it does not pass the smell test as far as I'm concerned, but I forget what I'm concerned. The question is what ABC News decided. That's what's important. And it is a staggering thing for ABC News to have done, because it is almost impossible to libel or defame a public figure under 60 years of Supreme Court jurisprudence dating back to a case called New York Times versus Sullivan. The idea being that free speech and the ability to criticize famous people and politicians and report on them requires an extraordinarily high standard to prove defamation or libel. And so you go into a case like this, it was like a Hail Mary that Trump was even taking this action against ABC for defamation, because it seemed like there was no way that he could win it. And he didn't win it. ABC decided to settle it. Why? Anybody? That's the question.
It's this Trump moon. That's what we're living through. And since before the election, when the LA Times and the Washington Post decided not to endorse a candidate for president, there has been a movement toward by institutions that were once heavily critical, part of the resistance toward Trump, to have a more accommodating posture. And it's continued since the election. The visits to Mar-a-Lago, Meta donating $1 million to Trump's inauguration, Amazon donating $1 million to Trump's inauguration, Trump basically taking on the responsibilities of the presidency more than a month before he's inaugurated. And now this latest twist favoring Trump, with ABC News reaching the $15 million settlement for the future Trump Presidential Library and Foundation. The thing doesn't even exist yet, and they're pledging to donate $15 million. I have a few observations about this huge news over the weekend. First piece that I find interesting is George Stephanopoulos is now responsible for more donations to the Trump Foundation than the money he gave the Clinton Foundation back in the early part of this decade. This was a story that actually my publication, The Free Beacon, uncovered during the 2016 news cycle, that George Stephanopoulos was a Clinton Foundation donor, and did not put me in good stead with George Stephanopoulos, I will say, but that the feeling's mutual. And now, of course, he's responsible for much more money being given to the Trump Foundation. So I find that, I guess the word is ironic. Second observation, if I may. Nancy Mace somehow is like the center of American politics. She's always finding herself in these controversies. She's a lot of drama, a lot of pizzazz, but she's involved too. And to watch the interview again, as I did, of this week with Stephanopoulos accosting her, harassing her, calling her a hypocrite. How dare you pretend that you care about the victims of sexual assault? By the way, Nancy Mace is one. How dare you?
That's why he called her a hypocrite.
Yeah, exactly. Like, say, how dare you, madam, say this when you support this man who's found guilty of rape? And And he said it again and again and again. It was outrageous. And I do think it was a reason that Trump sued in this case. And also say, could you in a million years imagine George Stephanopoulos asking a female Democratic politician why she supports Bill Clinton, for whom the evidence of rape of Juanita Broderick is far more substantive than ever it was in this E. Jean Carroll case? I mean, the hypocrisy is so blatant and staggering that it deserves this type of punishment. And moreover, final thought, after this suit was issued by the Trump people, Stephanopoulos went on the Colbert Show, where he was asked by Stephen Colbert, you were just sued by the Trump administration. How does it feel? Is it going to prevent you from doing your job? And Stephanopoulos, still, riding his moral high horse, which makes him very tall, says to the little people in the crowd, I won't be intimidated. I will continue to do my job. And in that moment, you see the arrogance, the moral certitude, the cynicism that so imbues the mainstream media and that has been completely disenthroned by this election. And I think that is a wonderful thing.
Can I just say? Oh, go ahead, David.
To Matt's point that Stephanopoulos said it over and over and over again. Yes, I think part of what is animating media institutions and others to be more conciliatory with Trump has to do with the sort of fear of what may be coming. But I also think in this case, I think Trump, while it is so difficult to prove the defamation of a public figure in the U.S., Trump seems to have had him dead to rights here. I mean, it's kind of cut and dry.
Right. Well,
ABC News also, we should assume that the corporate lawyers at ABC were very keen on discovery not happening if this case went forward, because there is no doubt that the email exchanges George Stephanopoulos and the producers of his show and others at ABC News might have had about Trump's character, about Trump's guilt or not guilt, were not going to make ABC News look at all reliable or nonpartisan or even like a news source. So I think and they want to protect their talent. They have a lot of money invested in George Stephanopoulos. And if that were to come out, they might have felt some pressure to have him, shuffled off into, I don't know, podcast land where the rest of us dwell. But their investment in his talent, I think, is something that they were probably protecting legally by not.
I also think that some of the emails probably said to him from higher ups, there are probably messages saying that was a step too far, or that's not really true, or we're getting inquiries when
you say higher ups, who's his boss? It's not the ABC executives. It's the DNC. George Stephanopoulos is a partisan hack. He was given lines to use against Nancy Mace in order to further the idea that Trump is guilty of rape, and he did it. That's the emails that would come out that would shame him, as he deserves to be shamed. And by the way, it's larger than ABC News. Who owns ABC? Disney. Disney doesn't want to get wrong with Trump right away. That's, I think, driving a lot of this.
I want to pull this back, Matt. Matt, you are essentially, in an interesting way, endorsing the left-wing critique of ABC's settlement plan, which is that they decided that they needed to get right with Trump before 2025. They didn't need to be in broigus with him, given everything that's going on and access and making sure that they still have a place in the White House press room. Their chair is still reserved when they're talking about giving up the seats to Charlemagne the God and stuff like that.
Joe Rogan,
right. I think that the dead to rights is exactly right, what Abe said, because for many years, when media companies have made controversial claims about individuals that seem to rise to the level of defamation, a lot of people on the right who saw it happen have said things like, I really hope that they sue they need to sue because there's no check on these corporations are often multi-billion-dollar corporations with extraordinarily deep pockets going after individuals. And it would be great if they sued, because even if they didn't prevail, the discovery process would end up revealing the private communications inside a company relating to a specific story. Most of the cases that I'm talking about here are, like this case, ideologically or driven by partisanship. And that one of the ways to force the mainstream media into more proper behavior is to hold it accountable. Well, how do you hold it accountable? These companies are too big to really experience boycotts in a way that would make a measurable difference to their bottom lines or to their viewerships or things like that. The only real way to do this is in a courtroom. The only real way to do it is to sue for slander or defamation, and it's too expensive. It is too expensive for individuals to do this. So in the most successful such case in the 21st century, that was the holding Gawker to account for its publication of a private video involving a married couple, Hulk Hogan and his wife, that Peter Thiel, one of the founders of PayPal, paid for the suit, Hulk Hogan's suit, because he couldn't afford it. And in fact, Gawker had done something. This was not a libel case. This was I don't even know what you call it. It was a invasion of privacy case or something. It doesn't matter. It was a civil action.
Today it would probably fall under revenge porn.
Right. But
statutes that weren't in existence then. But.
Right. Anyway, what happened was that Gawker was destroyed by its misbehavior, and it should have been, because if there's no way for a business to be punished for its particularly a media business to be punished for its behavior because of the scope problem, then there's no check on them. Imagine a world in which in 2004, George W. Bush, not only CBS News comes out with its faked letters from 1972 claiming that he had, escaped his National Guard service. Well, imagine a world in which he not only, the world erupts and there's an internal investigation and Dan Rather is fired, but that George W. Bush says, I'm suing you for defamation because you're not just defaming me, you're defaming every single person in the National Guard. You are claiming that people go in the National Guard for bad reason. You're wrong. You're wrong about me, but I'm doing this in order to create an accountability standard for the mainstream media. That could have been an epical moment. That wasn't anything that anybody did then. It is now something that people may do now. And the interesting response on the part of media critics and people on, screaming Nellies on Twitter and people who cover the media for the media, my favorite category of media reporter is, of course, somebody who works for CNN or NPR or somebody like that, because their purpose is to protect the guild, not actually to report on stories involving the behavior of the corporations that they're supposed to be holding, private corporations that they're supposed to be holding to account is, well, this is all going to be part of the same world in which the Trump people are threatening to go after reporters and institutions for the way they cover them. And it's like, yeah, that's right. You don't get a pass. You get a pass because of the First Amendment. Truth is the ultimate defense. You publish something true, you are safe. By the way, if you publish something insulting, you're safe. If you publish something scabrous or that says that you're disgusting and you're a horrible person, you're safe. If you say that somebody raped somebody when there is no finding of fact that somebody raped somebody, you are not and should not be safe.
And I think,
because
by the way,
how else are you going to prevent front page stories from saying that when somebody doesn't like somebody, particularly now in the world of deep fakes and things like that, this is a hygienic moment for the mainstream media.
Right.
This
And
is a
we should
way
note
for
that
the
we
mainstream
had,
media to get right
we
with.
had such a moment earlier during the first Trump term, in fact, which with the Covington kids. The Covington Catholic were a group of, Kentucky Catholic school kids who, made that trip to the Capitol, and they were confronted
For a
by
pro-life march,
Yeah,
right?
they were there
a
for the
pro-life
for
march. They
life.
were confronted by there was
A guy in a
A
drum
crazy
circle.
person.
a guy in a drum suit, but off to the side, there was apparently a black Hebrew Israelite taunting that people couldn't see, and it stirred up an atmosphere. And so the pictures that they published had no taunters. It looked like it just made Nicholas Sandmann, who was the 17-year-old kid who was part of the trip, especially, and we watched a ludicrous thing happen where commentators, like political commentators, pundits, would go on Twitter and say, "Boy, that kid has a punchable face." How many people that we know that we could name if we wanted to said, "Well, that kid has a punchable face." About a 17-year-old, it was like a psychotic break and people got off Twitter. And that some of the people who were responsible for egging that on got off. It was like this moment where people were like, what have we become, sort of thing. And he sued, and they settled with the Washington Post, and they settled with CNN.
And CNN, yeah.
And so that was 2019.
Right. I think
So that
it
was near
starts
the end
earlier,
of
though.
that.
I think it starts with Palin. I think it starts with Palin's defamation suit against the New York Times, which she did not win.
No, but that was an important suit because it was
this
allowed
was
to
the
continue.
beginning, right? Because it was the beginning of accountability when the New York Times suggested that a PAC ad that Palin had put out with targets around different Democratic politicians was somehow responsible.
Not politicians. They're districts.
Oh yeah, not even people. Yeah, exactly right. It was the battleground districts, target districts, right? Excuse me. And then the Times suggested that was responsible for the climate that led Jared Loughner, a completely out of his mind psychopath, to shoot Gabby Giffords. And Palin sued, and Nicholas Sandmann sued. Clearly, there is now a trend where you can hold these corporations accountable. And I mean, it's not defamation law or libel law, but the Bud Light boycott, I think, is similar as well. That is a case where a company was really hurt by conservative decisions to say, we're not endorsing this. And that is why I bring up the parent company of ABC, because Disney did get embroiled in a high-profile argument with Ron DeSantis, and conservatives in the right did turn against Disney, and it hurt Disney. And now I think it's logical to say, okay, clearly we've got all this wrong. We completely misjudged the climate in the country, the tenor of the country. Trump has won despite everything. Let us clear the decks. Let us kind of approach this next administration with a different attitude than the first. And I will say something similar happened after 1994, John. I know you remember, like when out of nowhere, it seemed, the Republicans took over Congress for the first time in 40 years. There were mainstream media companies that were like, oh, who are these Republicans? We need to find them, and maybe let's talk to them for a little bit. And it lasted 8 months before that interview you talked about the other day with Connie Chung and Newt Gingrich's mother. But it was there, and I think we're living through something similar.
We got several nice profiles of how Newt Gingrich liked zoos for 8 months.
But I do think they do have a challenge here. The corporations that control these media outlets, and that's that the talent is not necessarily going to go along with this new world. And I'm thinking of how The View has just turned into Sunny Hostin reading legal apologies every other day for everything that comes out of her mouth. And she's going to keep saying this stuff, and they're going to keep letting her, and then she'll have to apologize.
Remember
that tension, like having to clear the decks of the fan service that some of these media personalities are performing for Democrats, that's going to be a tougher thing to move.
Excuse me. The fact that the media is already treating this story not as a media story, but as a Trump pounces story, indicates that the decks are not cleared at all. I mean, they're right back on it.
I think they should have a dedicated segment. Sonny is sorry, and just because they're going to have to plan out 5 minutes for this every day. But I think that's an important point, which is that it's like this is not the hot stove test is not really working, is it? People are going back and touching the stove again and again because they like touching the stove, or because they think it's really important as a journalist / firefighter to keep touching that stove.
They're stunning and brave.
I'm sorry. Since the election, the media coverage of Trump has been completely different than it has been since 2015.
It has. But look, not again to go in my role as, I'm the grizzled old veteran that's seen it all and done it all. But I have been involved as a plaintiff or a player in several major lawsuits against media organizations in my career, dating back to my early 20s at the Washington Times. And the reason that some of this does have an effect that you guys don't realize is you have no idea how intrusive an experience it can be to be involved in a lawsuit like this. You are talking about hours and hours and hours of depositions and preparations for depositions. You were talking about having forensic audits done of your own mail. This is even before email, your taxes, looking the plaintiff who's suing you, wanting to see if they can establish that you might have been paid by somebody to do what you did. And I was never even a lead plaintiff in any of these cases. They were usually, because I was on a masthead, I was somebody in a position where somebody like Louis Farrakhan, who sued the New York Post at one point for $4 billion, put me on the lawsuit. And it was eventually thrown out before anything went. But it kind of ruins your life. And it's one of the things that any respectable lawyer will say to anybody who is having a cow about something untrue said about them is, you have to weigh your choices here, because you are going down a road that will take your life over if you decide to be Hulk Hogan, or what's his name? Terry
Bollea.
Terry Bollea. It's going to take your life over. It's going to be the one of the two things that you do for the next 3 years.
I can't wait to see him at the inauguration, by the way. Do you think he'll rip his shirt off?
Rip his shirt off and have a tuxedo under it.
President Trump.
No, I think it would be great if he ripped it off and had like a full, evening wear, right? With tails and a top hat.
I just want to say he could get confirmed easily if like Tulsi flames out or something.
Yeah.
That's a 100-0 confirmation.
John, you're absolutely right. I mean, think about all that our friends at National Review have been through because of the Michael Mann lawsuit that was not thrown
like
out
13 years
in DC court, and they had to go through. No one likes this. No one likes the judicial system or the legal process. It's awful. It's terrible. But it is striking that ABC did this right now at this point. And I think it has to do with larger currents in the political and media space. And one thing, too, about whether these hosts are going to keep, the talent is going to keep saying things like Trump is a rapist, saying falsehoods. They are losing audience share. We have to put this situated in the background of the larger media story of this election, which is the mainstream media is collapsing. And think about cord cutting, right? I mean, people are not watching these shows anymore. Maybe a very small audience is, and that audience is enough to drive a certain amount of revenue that keeps these shows sustainable. But I think there is a public veto that's happening about some of this commentary and some of these narratives. Let me play out in real time.
Let me throw that out to you in relation to this podcast.
Yes.
Okay. According to numbers that we saw last week and have been seeing since November, at certain times in the day on MSNBC is scoring the way you do ratings in the United States is that you break ratings up into age categories, because advertisers will tend to want to buy the sweet spot is Americans 25 to 49. Why? Because Americans 25 to 49 thought that they will brand switch. You put before them a car, maybe they'll think about buying a new car. You put before them a new kind of toothpaste, maybe they'll put before them a new kind of retractable catheter, maybe they'll try the new form of retractable catheter. I don't know. Anyway, that's obviously not for the 25 to 49s. But that is the prize demographic. And when people talk about ratings, a lot of the time what they're actually talking about is the rating within the rating. That is that number between ages between 25 and 49. And we have heard that at MSNBC, the audience that watches at certain times of the day is under 40,000 Americans in the 25 to 49 demographic. And Commentary's podcast has more listeners than that on a daily basis. Now, we are not in competition with MSNBC. It's just us guys sitting here on Riverside, a podcast video platform, talking. We don't have offices at 30 Rock. We don't have Richard Engel in the Middle East and Jacob Soboroff publishing propaganda at the border. We don't have any of that. It's just us five and you wonderful people helping us to keep the lights on here. That's a pretty staggering thing. Why does MSNBC still remain a viable entity? It has nothing to do with ratings. Cable channels get money from cable systems
providers
that pay them what are called carriage fees, essentially the right to carry the network. And in 2 years, a lot of these deals are going to be up. And it's hard to imagine that something as well known or as branded as MSNBC will simply disappear because Spectrum and I don't know Optimum, all those.
Remember, it's going to be spun off sooner than that, right?
Right. It's going to be spun off with the idea that when the cable carriage fees come up for renewal, that there will be money to be made by another company from cable carriage fees. But if MSNBC's numbers remain below Commentary's podcast numbers for the next 2 years, they're going to get 22 cents per subscriber as opposed to $4 per subscriber or $2 per subscriber, and they are going to go away. They will not exist anymore. And The View, similarly, though that's a broadcast show, so it actually makes money on advertising.
Yeah.
If things go the way that they're going, $15 million to pay off George Stephanopoulos. He is the host of the only valuable program on ABC. Or there are two valuable, but Good Morning America. The morning shows make the majority of the money that broadcast networks make as a national matter. And so he is a brand that they need. They can shut The View down tomorrow. Rupert Murdoch fired Tucker Carlson with the highest rated show in cable news in 5 minutes when he found it politically prudent to do so. Sonny Hostin is living on a knife's edge without knowing it. If you're Bob Iger or Bob Iger's successor and you have to have 10 minutes of conversation a day about Sonny Hostin, you're going to send Sonny Hostin and her show off into dreamland and put on the My Pillow guy.
But there's a lot of there's something else going on though internally, I think, at some of these places. I mean, MSNBC is a good example. The fan service they performed during the first Trump term did bring them more viewers and lots of ratings, and they made a lot of money during that first term doing what they did against Trump. So they're repeating. A lot of their shows are just repeating that same playbook without realizing, like a lot of people in the Democratic Party, that the election went to Trump not because the fans didn't turn out and vote for Kamala Harris, but because there's this vast middle that has really shifted dramatically in the last, decade in this country. And they have never spoken to those people. They generally condescend to them if they mention them at all. And I was struck by, on MSNBC the other night, Stephanie Ruhle comparing the murderer, whose name I won't say, of Thompson, the CEO of United Healthcare, with Daniel Penny, because Daniel Penny went and attended the Army-Navy game at the invitation of J.D. Vance. And she said, these two men are exactly the same. They both killed someone, and now the entire country is celebrating their violence.
And guess what? Daniel Penny can sue Stephanie Ruhle.
Exactly. That was my
literally.
point.
I mean, Daniel Penny was defamed by Stephanie Ruhle, likening him.
And nobody objected on this panel. They all just nod. But even for someone who leans Democratic, that kind of hyperbolic ignorance is not selling anymore. And that, as to Matt's earlier point, that's a good thing. Now, Trump probably motivated that shift, but I think there's also a general dissatisfaction among consumers of cable news who roll their eyes at that and go, this is idiotic. It's not just that it's partisan, it's just dumb.
Okay, go ahead, Ed.
I just say, I think when you talk about how they were successful in providing fan service to the anti-Trump hordes in 2016 and the following years, the angry viewership now, the scared viewership, the enraged American viewership now, it's not directed at Trump. They're not capturing what the thing is that people are upset about, and it can't be embodied in a person. It's a sort of general distrust and resentment of institutions, Democratic and Republican, and neither, and private and public. It's more the embodiment of the drone phenomenon. It's like it's that it's no longer a partisan audience that you have to cater to if what you're trying to do is harness American outrage. It's not partisan today. It's something else.
And that's where you need to look to politicians, because I think this is an interesting, moving on to the drones a little bit. So back in 2005, 2006, we had this very peculiar moment when Dubai Ports World was going to buy the port in Port Elizabeth, New Jersey, outside, just across the channel from New York City. And the idea was, why not? Doesn't really matter who owns a port. What is it? Chuck Schumer, among other people, went completely ballistic about this, said this cannot be allowed to happen. Dubai is an Arab, we've just been through 9/11. The Bush administration was like, what? They're, they're our allies. Dubai's fine. And, it doesn't matter who owns a port. Like, that's just a real estate investment. It doesn't matter. And everybody but Schumer, who had a more tactile feel for this, as did politicians in New York City, when somebody announced they wanted to build a mosque at Ground Zero, which, by the way, was like 5 blocks from Ground Zero. The people were like, well, it's a free country to build a mosque. It's, Islam is a religion of peace. And in both cases, the mosque was never built, and Dubai Ports World did not buy Port Elizabeth. And the drones were back in it 20 years later almost. And the drone story is very grudgingly being carried. I don't understand it. None of us understands it. Seems like a very weird story, obviously. There's reason to think that if we're really going to look at this deeply, that the U.S. government may be involved in doing something for our own national security that it cannot reveal. But the newly minted senator from New Jersey, Andy Kim, a replacement for Bob Menendez, put out a 25-tweet stream this weekend saying, we need answers. Chris Christie said, was the governor of New Jersey, obviously said, I saw the drones over my house. We need answers. This is a story that a rational mainstream, like a suffering for attention, mainstream media like CNN and MSNBC should be talking about 40 minutes an hour.
Right, well, also that the follow-up to that was that Andy Kim then went on Twitter with a thread explaining why he thinks they're planes and not drones and whatever. But the thread was he had to go personally out and investigate, not as a senator that he was able to, bring an investigative body and call witnesses. He literally had to go outside at night with the cops.
Yeah,
right.
With flight tracking information and whatever. And you're watching Andy Kim do this, and you're saying, how could the news organizations pass this up? How could CNN, which loved, a missing plane in the air, how could they not be the ones out there with the especially because they could say in the end that it's probably not drones, it's probably all planes or whatever. But how could you not put somebody out there with the same thing that a U.S. senator has, which is a cell phone and a cop, and some data available freely on the internet, and go find out and get the answer? Nobody wanted to get the answer, so a senator went outside and spent like 3 nights camping out.
Yeah,
we'd
have to watch CNN to see if they're covering the story, which is for me a bridge too far. But John, I did have the thought today, listening to some coverage about the drone story, that and I don't like to make predictions, but part of me thinks that New Jersey is going to have a Republican governor next year elected because of the drones. The drones, to hear the New Jersey residents talk about the drones is to hear the voice of outrage at authority and bureaucracy. And when you look at the election results in New Jersey as well, being a swing state, getting very close to going red this time around, I think you can see a potential populist groundswell related to the drones that will help Republicans in New Jersey in the off year.
And Mayorkas, look, over the weekend, Mayorkas did say that the federal government is now going to look into this, but that is a very, very much a too little, too late responding to.
How nice!
He also said, I have to say this. To listen to Mayorkas, he said he was asked, can you shoot them down if they're dangerous or you don't know what they are, and he said, well, we do have some authorities, but I think the authorities need to be expanded. And I understand this is a big issue. A lot of people are very concerned about the drones. We're seeing the drones everywhere. But can we just not expand Mayorkas' authority for the next month? Can we just wait until the transition? Because with the authorities he's had on the southern border, led to the greatest immigration surge in American history, most of which was illegal. So this is just like, let's just wait. If we can be a little bit patient, that's all I'm.
So you're saying you don't trust him when it involves aliens?
I don't trust him at all. That's what I'm saying.
I think in the end, the reason that that the mainstream media as they are constituted at the moment, excuse me, will be an extremely different set of institutions 5 years from now, is precisely because my sense is that they are so far up their own patooties that when this story came down, they could not suss out who cui bono, whom did it benefit. They were not going to spend 8 hours a day doing a story that was going to help Trump on his way into office with the idea that something inexplicable and potentially dangerous to national security was going on while Joe Biden was looking to release judges from jail who were sending children into private prisons for no reason that anybody can possibly discern, while doing nothing else. And because it looked like it was going to help Trump, they very grudgingly climbed onto the issue 5 days after it started. Whereas, as Seth says, when Jeff Zucker, then head of CNN, saw a plane disappear off the radar, over, wherever the hell it was, Kazakhstan or Azerbaijan, or, disappearing off the map, they spent a year talking about it 4 hours a day. This story is like populist catnip. And they are.
And this was over America.
This is over America. They are harming themselves at a moment when they need ratings. They're actually making it harder for them to get ratings because this is something that people are just naturally interested in.
And the
And they don't
election
want to
is
cover it
over.
because
It's not even like they're, doing this to help the Democratic candidate, which is terrible if that were the case. But the election's over. What are they even doing?
By the way, I gather that Kamala Harris said yesterday that she's not going anywhere, and we haven't seen the last of her yet.
She's giving a speech tomorrow.
She is
in PG County.
A whole speech
to inspire.
Will it be 22 minutes
to keep
long?
up the fight? That's good. And then she'll disappear again for a little bit. But CNN today, we should just a little bit of politics that amused me this morning. CNN today reports on the debate raging in Harris world over whether she should run for governor of California in 2026, which they view as a gimme, or hold out for the big enchilada and run for the presidency in 2028. And I just have to say, go for it. Go for it, Kamala. It's going to be great. It's going to be great to watch.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. So we'll be back tomorrow. For Seth, Matt, Christine, and Abe, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.